I'm going to start with a plea for help. I have a rather large problem, as you may well have gathered over recent months and years, but particularly this week. I strain, as you know, for analogies that somehow manage to straddle the sublime and the ridiculous. And I think that I find myself now, almost every day, looking at something in the news, something that is actually happening, and noting that it is something that you were promised wouldn't happen, or indeed it is the polar opposite of what you promised would happen. And yet not only do you profess not to care about it or not to have noticed, but also that you still really love the people who misled you. So my analogy for today, and I think it might be one of the best, if somebody set fire to your hair, why would you ring a national radio station to tell me, A, that your hair isn't on fire, and B, that the person who set fire to your hair is your best friend and somebody for whom you would march or climb over the top of the trenches? If I set fire to your hair, I can't imagine anything better than you being so bent over backwards that you'd A, deny that your hair was on fire, and B, continue to claim that I was a stand-up guy who had your best interests at heart. Do you remember someone called Nigel Farage? Do you remember Nigel Farage and his sort of curious fetishisation almost of the fishing industry during, well, most of the last decade, actually? He was a curious cove. He sat on the relevant committee in the European Parliament, but never went to the meetings, and yet claimed to have the interests of British fisherfolk carved upon his heart in the way that Calais was said to be carved upon old Queen Mary's. And I don't know what he's up to these days. I think he's available for sort of hen nights and bar mitzvahs. I could be wrong, but I do remember him making a very big deal about fish. In fact, so much so that as the various layers of Brexit nonsense began to fall apart, we on this programme used to believe, and mea culpa, another mistake for the list of my errors over the years, we believed that fish and blue passports would actually be the only things left for people to claim had been delivered as promised, because everything else had gone off the proverbial cliff. There is now measurably more red tape. There is now measurably a shortage of workers in various sectors. There is now categorically and measurably a grave threat to the peace and or prosperity of Northern Ireland. But we did genuinely believe, and I did as well, I mean, I thought it was funny to shout fish or fish and blue passports on a regular basis, because I thought it was funny that people were still pretending that they knew what they voted for when all that was left in the box that was supposed to have increased trade, reduced regulation, less red tape, more money. You remember that massive box, 350 million quid for the NHS? You remember that enormous box? And then that's what it said on the outside of it, like the bus. But, of course, the bloke responsible for the lie on the bus is Mr. Trustworthy this week. We opened the box that had all that stuff written on it, and I honestly thought inside it we'd find a fish and a blue passport. I possibly wasn't paying attention. I don't know whether I need to apologise to you. If perhaps I'd paid a little bit more attention to the issue, I might have known that there wouldn't be a fish in the box. But here's the problem. The fishermen, or the fisherfolk, just to nod towards Nick's little story at the end there about boys and girls being removed from the vocabulary of a classroom in the West Midlands. Fisherfolk, as opposed to fishermen and fisherwomen, fisherfolk, they also believed that their situation would somehow get better. In fact, the fella, he's gone again. Keith? Nigel Farage, he when he sort of left one party and formed another, and he put his left foot in and his left foot out, he did the hokey cokey and he shook it all about, and I think the other party he formed was full of people that claimed to represent the fishing industry, and they kept saying that it was a good idea to come out of the customs union and the single market, and I think Farage himself claimed that fishing, what happened to the fishing industry, would be the acid test of Brexit. So as it all fell away, you had these two totems, I think you could call them, left. If you still think that a blue passport that allows you considerably less freedom than your old passport is a win, probably you're listening to the wrong radio programme. I mean, you're welcome. I hope you keep listening. I don't know if you're going to like it, because we sort of subscribe to the school of thought that the number of countries into which you can travel, move and work freely, according to your passport, is more important than the colour of the cover. I know that still sounds a bit weird to some people, but generally, you see, passport. What's more important, the number of ports you can pass or the colour on the cover of the document that allows you to pass through ports? I can't believe that question still sounds so relevant, can you? What's more important? The number of ports through which you can pass freely, or the colour of the cover of the document that lets you pass through ports? Anyway, that's still there. So maybe that's the win. That's the tangible benefit. But the fish, I'm afraid, have reached something of a Waterloo. Despite Jacob Rees-Mogg's desperate attempts to claim that fish end up somehow happier by dint of being in British waters. You think I'm making that up?
And the key is we've got our fish back. They're now British fish, and they're better and happier fish for it.
Off cap, Tug Forlock. Remember, he's better than you, so mustn't be held to account, or indeed in any way be blamed for the fact that you believed the nonsense that he spouted for the best part of half a decade. So, despite the fact that they are apparently happier fish, we find ourselves today contemplating a frankly astonishing situation, even for someone that watches proceedings as closely as I do. What we see in front of us today is Norway, which is a third country, but I always get a little bit confused about which bits it stayed in. It's further in than we are. It's not an EU member state, Norway. UK Fisheries is a company responsible for landing a huge amount of our cod, actually. UK fleets generally have been told that they will have no access to Norway's sub-Arctic waters. So the UK and Norway have failed to reach a deal. The simple fact is that as a direct result of Brexit, we are required to renegotiate quotas, treaties and deals that we previously enjoyed as members of the European Union. So now that we are a market of 60 million as opposed to part of a market of 600 million, negotiations with Norway become independent rather than part of the bloc. And for reasons that I genuinely don't understand, I mean that. I know I'm doing a lot of tongue-in-cheekery today, but I genuinely don't understand why they have failed so spectacularly. I can only presume that warnings about us not actually having any qualified or decent negotiators to do the really important negotiations that would be necessary as a result of leaving the European Union were true. I mean, you can only just presume that we sent absolute muppets to undertake these negotiations. If there's another answer, you know that we'll listen to it. 034560600973. Weeks of talks concluding with Norway continuing to sell their fish products into the UK tariff-free, while the UK fleet is suddenly and completely excluded from Norwegian waters. Don't take my words for it. The chief executive of UK Fisheries has explained that the UK government, which, as you know, I prefer to call the Vote Leave government, has failed, and I'm going to quote now Jane Sandell, the UK Fisheries Chief Executive, even to maintain the rights we have had to fish in Norwegian waters for decades. I'll read that to you again. Because remember, everything was going to get better. UK Fisheries Chief Executive reports that actually what they've got now is worse than what they'd had for decades. I mean, that's objectively incredible, right? What are you voting for? Well, we're going to make things better. What have you ended up with? It's not as good as what we had before. Well, yeah, you would say that. You're just a trendy left-wing Ramona. No, mate, this is the chief executive of UK Fisheries. One of their boats catches 10% of the entire cod catch for this country. One single boat. It's like an epic trawler freezer, rammed to the rafters with cod and haddock. And I hopefully will get to the seaside this weekend, and I shall be enjoying some fish and chips, but I will spare a thought for the hundreds of fishermen, particularly coming out of Hull, and ports like that who now face unemployment as a direct result of this government's conscious or unconscious decision to make things worse for fisherfolk. She goes on, in consequence, there will be no British caught Arctic cod sold through chippies for our national dish. It will all be imported from the Norwegians, who will continue to sell their fish products to the UK tariff-free, while we are excluded from these waters. Quite simply, this is a disgrace and a national embarrassment. I don't know. I genuinely don't know how this has happened. So a spokesman for DEFRA says that it had always been clear that the UK would only strike agreements if they are balanced and in the interests of the UK fishing industry. So do you know what this is? This is actually proof that no deal is better than a bad deal, but only for Norway when it comes to their fishing rights and freedom to sell into the UK. And this is the problem with English exceptionalism, I think, or magical thinking. I don't know, but I'm looking for possible explanations as to how this industry, which was supposed to be the one that was going to benefit most from Brexit, has ended up being measurably, demonstrably and irrefutably worse off than it was before. And I think this quote here from the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, a department headed up, I think, by an ex-UKIP member. What an astonishing coincidence, isn't it? We put forward a fair offer on access to UK waters and the exchange of fishing quotas, but we have concluded that our positions remain too far apart to reach an agreement this year, they added, which would be just about fine, wouldn't it? If Norway didn't come away with everything that they had before they entered into the negotiations, while the UK has come away with considerably less than what it had before entering into negotiations. Now I don't know how many people connected to the fishing industry are listening to this programme at the moment. I presume if you fell into Farage's smelly little traps, you're still probably not ready to admit that this is your fault. You told your crew members, you told your industry, you told your country, you told your customers that things would be better, and now they're worse. So I find it highly unlikely that you're going to be ready yet to say. A couple have. I've seen them interviewed. There's a chap called Ian Perks who's popping up all over the place as a previously prominent Brexiter, explaining how his industry's been absolutely filleted, if you'd pardon the pun. Live shellfish exports, as we know, are in mortal danger. Some companies facing either oblivion or complete relocation to continental Europe. And I have two questions. Number one is, how has this happened? 0345 6060 973. Were they lying all along, or are they just really rubbish at everything? That's a bit of a Hobson's choice, isn't it? But if you've got a third answer to the question, I'll bite your arm off, as long as it's crispy coated. And the second question is, and this is what I mean about me asking you every day why you're not cross with the people who set fire to your hair. My hair's not on fire, James. Ow, ow, ow. My hair's not on fire, James. And the bloke over there with the box of matches, he's on my team. Doff Cap Tug Forelock tried to put out flaming hair. So having been, if you, and I know I haven't found a way to tempt, I've had some calls this week from people who are, not aware of how deluded they are, but I don't necessarily enjoy witnessing people's ignorance being put on humiliating display. But I don't know how else to do it, because millions and millions of people in this country, which means tens or hundreds of thousands of people listening to this programme now, honestly thought, as everything else fell away, that fish and blue passports would be left. Now, you've got your blue passport, all right? What's that game? Is it Who Wants to Be Millionaire, I think? You keep that, whatever happens. You keep your blue passport, all right? But whatever happens now, you can keep your blue passport. If you were the kind of person that was ringing me a couple of years ago to wang on about coastal, what was it? An independent coastal state. If you were one of those people who listened to that fella with the teeth, Nigel Farage, talking about fishing being the acid test, and you thought I was some sort of either deceptive or deceived or just dodgy, bad actor, punting out nonsense, quoting blooming experts, why have you suddenly forgotten all about the fishermen? Why have you forgotten all about the fish? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Because I honestly thought you cared about these people. No, I honestly did. I know that it's hard to understand how someone who was a member of the relevant committee but didn't go to any meetings or went to about 1 in 30. I don't know how you ended up thinking he cared, but I thought you did. I genuinely thought you cared about this proud old British industry. So why have you gone so quiet? 0345 6060 973. And why aren't you cross with the people who set fire to your hair? What's happened to the fish is the question. 0345 6060 973. Any schadenfreude you might enjoy as all of the promises stroke lies of people like Farage come home to roost is, for me at least, maybe I'm just a bit too nice for this business. For me at least, it's completely wiped out by the thought of all the families in places like Hull. One of my dad's first jobs was on the Hull Daily Mail, and all the families in places like Hull who are facing the potential loss of their livelihoods. So what's happened? 03456060 and appropriately enough, we'll begin in Norway, which I should remind you, I've done my homework now, I should have done it before the show. It's part of the single market, but not part of the customs union. So that means it sets its own tariffs on goods imported from outside the single market, but Norwegian goods, with exceptions for farm produce and fish, are imported tariff-free into the EU. So I think, and again, I'm open to correction, but the problem is that all of the experts are probably still a little bit bruised by being maligned and dismissed by people like Michael Gove. I think that means that in terms of cod, in terms of subarctic catches, so cod and haddock and similar, we in the UK have now lost our rights to fish in those waters and will end up paying more for the fish that are caught in those waters by Norwegian and possibly Greenlandish and Icelandic fleets as well. But anyway, John is in Helgheim in Norway. John, what's going on?
Right, worse than that, I come from Hull as well.
Do you really? Oh, my days.
Yeah.
That's boxes ticked, isn't it? Crikey, crack on.
Right, Okay, first of all, the Brexiteers tried to blame the EU on the demise of the UK fishing industry. Now, if your dad was on the Hull Daily Mail, have you heard of the phrase cod war?
Yes, of course I have, back in the 70s.
Exactly. So, one, the British fishing fleets on their own were fishing to oblivion the Dogger Bank and the UK fishing waters. And then, after the cod war, the UK fleet lost its access to the Icelandic waters. But, of course, it's nothing to do with the cod war and it's nothing to do with the Brits overfishing. It's the EU which wrecked the UK fishing fleet or the fishing industry. Do you get the idea? So
yes. So you need to understand what's happened now. You have to go back to misconceptions and misinformation that is decades old.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
And so what Farage has been doing is kind of more or less selling this idea that Hull can again have fish dock full of trawlers, everybody employed up to their eyeballs at porters on the fish dock, because Hull can once again get access to this massive amounts of fish, which of course we now know don't exist. And not only that, just think of how the technology has moved on now. One modern trawler can scoop loads of fish out of the sea that used to be done by about 6 or 7.
Yes, but this massive trawler owned by UK fisheries, which, I mean, a double take for me, picks up about 10% of all the cod consumed in this country, now can't fish at all in these waters. It's tied up, appropriately enough, in Hull and has no access to the Norwegian coastal waters. So the history lesson is important, and if only people had paid attention before falling for the very fishy tales of Farage and his friends. But what's happened now? I mean, how have we ended up worse? How have we ended off with worse arrangements for Fisherfolk than we had before?
Well, it's no different to individual citizens who used to have rights in the EU, but they now no longer have them. Pretty much every treaty that the UK ever had with anybody on the grounds that it was a member of the EU must now be renegotiated. So actually, the UK had managed to get a pretty good deal. Interestingly enough, by leaving the EU, perhaps what the Norwegians have been saying is that the EU is not the same entity it was when the UK was a member. And maybe they've taken that opportunity to say, do you know what? I think we should renegotiate all of these treaties.
So Norway have come back and said, well, we'd like a bit of that. If you want this, we'd like a bit of that and a bit of that. While you're there, would you stick a cherry on top? And the UK have said, because they're all in hock to the vote leave cabal in Downing Street, they said there's no earthly way we can sell that to the British people because they'll laugh us out of town. So no, we're out of here.
Exactly.
So they've made a conscious decision that no deal is better than a bad deal.
Yeah, that's it. So basically, the whole landscape has changed so much. The definition of everybody, all of the treaties, and everything has been changed by Brexit.
But how can I mean, a bad deal, however bad it was, would have entailed the UK fleet to stop laughing. Would have entailed, and I know it's wry laughter. There is not really any Schadenfreude. You'll know people back home in Hull who are facing financial oblivion and probably a lot of them voted for it, which is the fault of the con men, not the conned. I'll say that till my dying day. But what I don't get, and you probably don't either, I don't know, is how they've ended up with nothing. So even if we'd said, all right, Norway, you can have a cherry and some chocolate sprinkles, and all right, I'll give you a flake as well, since you asked so nicely. But at least we can still fish in the waters we were fishing in before. How have we ended up excluded from the waters that, in the case of one ship, the Kokela, a state-of-the-art freezer trawler, that was feeding 10% of all the fish suppers in this country were coming off that one boat, and now it can't fish where it was fishing before? How has that bit happened?
Well, it's quite simply is that as far as I work out, the EU nations had access to Norwegian waters as a deal with the EU. We, by Brexiting, we've changed the definition of the EU and the definition of all of the treaties that there were between EU nations and EFTA nations.
And we don't know what they were asking for that in return. Well, I mean, so the UK government is reduced to saying, what do you want? What do you want from us in return for us being able to carry on? What extra do you want that you don't currently get from us in return for us to be able to carry on doing what we've been doing for 20 years? We don't know what Norway turned around and said, do we?
But it's worse than that.
What did they ask for?
It's worse than that, because what have we got that Norway wants? EFTA, Iceland and Norway are both in EFTA. So this is actually kind of like a bit of a kind of like trade block war in the sense that EFTA have loads of waters that the rest of the EU gets its cod and its other fish from. And of course, as you know, Brits don't actually like the fish that's in the North Sea that we can go and catch.
The oily fish. Anyways. The oily fish.
Exactly, yeah. Funnily enough, actually, the Norwegians do like that. So I
know they do. Herrings. Sorry to be a little bit stereotypical, but herrings are huge in Norway.
Still, So all of this, so there might be some kind of deal where we find out that we're up to our eyeballs in Norwegian factory.
We're all going to have to start eating mackerel, aren't we? We're all going to have to start eating roll mop herrings. I rather like a roll mop herring, but I prefer a fish. I prefer a fish supper. All right, John, I've got some clarity here. So, in a nutshell, it was the idea that we'd be able to somehow defy the laws of gravity by dint of wrapping ourselves in a Union flag.
Yes.
Okay, that'll do. As with so many of these issues from the last few years, my understanding comes from contemplation, not participation. I have never been to sea on a fishing trawler, but I did honestly believe in my foolishness. I did honestly believe, because I thought it was funny stroke heartbreaking. Oh, wow, how much does that sum up from the last couple of years? Funny stroke heartbreaking. I did honestly think that people who said that Brexit would be good for the fishing industry believed it and or meant it. Farage excluded. I wouldn't believe him if he told me it was Tuesday, on a Tuesday. But the rest of them, I think, honestly did believe it. And they honestly did think it was possible. And then you'd have trade experts queuing up to explain the relationship with the single market, with the European Economic Area, why the notion of suddenly being able to fish wherever we wanted was naive, because any deal would involve trade as well as quotas. I don't fully understand how we've ended up doing so badly, but I am interested, if you fancy it, in your explanation of why you've sort of turned your ears off, having ended up a year or two ago with nothing but fish in your fantasy Brexit box, to discover that it hasn't even got fish in it. And as John in Norway a moment ago suggested, that the truly don't want to use a rude word. So what fanatical Brexiter will probably already be trying to blame it on the EU, which is hilarious, really, given that everything was better when we were in it. For fishermen, all right? 03456060973 is the number to call. Now, a few of you have referenced a call that I had actually forgotten about from 2018 from a lovely woman who worked on the sort of fishing front in Lowestoft and rang in 2018 when fish were really in their pomp as one of the great big Brexit wins that was on everybody's horizon, and went on subsequently, I think, to join Nigel's little party. So here's a little reminder.
We used to have a thriving industry, and we've given it away.
I know that line, and I respect it, and I sympathise with it. But the question I asked you was, why does it matter who buys the fish as long as you can sell it?
Well, that's again. I'm not going to get into this, that, and the other.
Well, this is why things get so frustrating.
We want to catch our own fish, and we want to sell it to other people and other places further afield.
For example.
Well, Korea. We send whelks there now. I've got a whelk boat welking out of Lowestoft at the moment. All those whelks are going to Korea. Great.
So we can already sell. So we're already selling whelks to Korea then.
Yes.
So why would it be a good idea to reduce our trading arrangements with our biggest customer on the planet?
We never said we wouldn't. I'll still.
But we have to. If we don't, we're pulling out of the free trade agreement. That's what we're doing. We're having to negotiate a new one.
What I'm saying is, if Mr. Johnny Foreigner in Europe don't want it, we'll send it elsewhere.
But they do want it.
On these people.
They do want it. They buy £921 million worth of it every year.
Well, then they take most of it out of our waters. All we want.
No, this is British fish. I can't do this, June. I respect you and I like you, and I'll come.
You're now looking at figures and getting heavy with me.
Yeah, I am. I'm looking at facts, and you're giving me feelings. Yeah, this is Brexit. This is the debate. You and I are never going to agree with each other. I sympathise with your position. You hate the fact that I'm giving you facts and figures, and I hate the fact.
I don't hate anything.
But you all right? Hate's the wrong word. You don't want me. You don't want me to give you all the facts and figures.
I've got facts and figures as well. Then we will start arguing, and we said we weren't going to do that, didn't we?
Well, I think it's a bit late. That ship has sailed. So £921 million currently goes to the EU.
6.4 billion will come back into this country if you.
But my number has happened, June.
It will happen. Have faith in your country, Mr. O'Brien.
I do. Indeed, I do. Let's find out whether June Mummery still does. How do you feel listening back to that, June? Welcome, by the way.
Hi, James. Yeah, quite funny, really. I'll calm down a lot. Yeah, I sell fish for a living, and that's what I do. Yeah, I listen to it, and we have been sold out by our Prime Minister, and I am deeply upset.
That was me talking then, and I think you probably realise I'm not a big fan of Boris Johnson's. I told you.
He did. Yeah, he sold us out.
No,
yes,
but
Boris has sold us out.
No, I told you what was going to happen in that call from exactly 3 years ago, almost to the day.
No, James, you didn't tell us what happened. I'm delighted we've left the EU. I'm delighted with that. It's the deal, James. It's the deal that our government got for the fishing industry. And the gentleman you just had on, I couldn't really hear. I got cut off with him a couple of times.
Don't worry about him. I'm just.
But hang on, that's a big deal. What I'm going to say about him.
All right.
He owns the Kakela is a Dutch vessel.
Yes, he had nothing to do with the Kakela.
But the Kakela is a flagship.
Yes.
It is a British registered, but owned by the Dutch.
Yes, but the fellow who was just on was just a member of the public from Norway, June.
Well, yeah, he's probably working he's working in Norway, and he's talking about that side of things. It's because that doesn't interfere with his life here. Brexit taking back full control, James, was about rebuilding an industry.
So why are none of the ships in Hull, why are none of the trawlers in Hull allowed into Norwegian waters then at the moment?
Because of the deal that our government got.
So when you listen back...
If we'd have taken back...
Yes.
Listen, James...
I'm hanging on your every syllable. Yes.
Yeah, I've got to go in a meeting in a minute, so I'm rushing it through. Sorry.
Oh, what a shame.
I'm so sorry. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is, if we'd have taken back full control of our waters and the resource, we would be in a completely different position now.
Yes, but you heard me 3 years ago explaining to you why that was impossible. So... Who's been proved right? You're
impossible at all.
Of course it was.
Was it impossible?
Well,
it was not.
Because the quotas were always going to be linked to the trade agreement. There's a quid pro quo. So in return for fishing in...
No, James, we've taken it back. quotas, isn't owned by anybody.
Right.
It's people have the entitlement to use it. It's no different to the milk quota. Our government can take that back when they want.
Right.
What I'm saying is, it's the deal that Boris got. Our government was unprepared. I said it all along.
You didn't.
No, well,
But let's play the tape again. Let's play the tape again, June. Because you know, my listeners are.
Go back to the tape.
No, let's listen to you saying that it was going to be a really bad deal all along. Then go on.
We used to have a thriving industry, and we've given it away.
I know that line, and I respect it, and I sympathise with it. But the question I asked you was, why does it matter who buys the fish as long as you can sell it?
Well, that's again. I'm not going to get into this, that, and the other.
Well, this is why things get so frustrating.
We want to catch our own fish, and we want to sell it to other people and other places further afield.
For example,
well, Korea. We send whelks there now. I've got a whelk boat welcoming out of Lowestoft at the moment. All those whelks are going to Korea. Great.
So we can already sell. So we're already selling whelks to Korea then.
Yes.
So why would it be a good idea to reduce our trading arrangements with our biggest customer on the planet?
We never said we wouldn't. I'll still.
But we have to. If we don't, we're pulling out of the free trade agreement. That's what we're doing. We're having to negotiate a new one.
What I'm saying is, if Mr. Johnny Foreigner in Europe don't want it, we'll send it elsewhere.
But they do want it.
On these people.
They do want it. They buy £921 million worth of it every year.
Well, then they take most of it out of our waters. All we want.
No, this is British fish. I can't do this, June. I respect you and I like you, and I'll come.
You're now looking at figures and getting heavy with me.
Yeah, I am. I'm looking at facts, and you're giving me feelings. Yeah, this is Brexit. This is the debate. You and I are never going to agree with each other. I sympathise with your position. You hate the fact that I'm giving you facts and figures, and I hate the fact.
I don't hate anything.
But you all right? Hate's the wrong word. You don't want me. You don't want me to give you all the facts and figures.
I've got facts and figures as well. Then we will start arguing, and we said we weren't going to do that, didn't we?
Well, I think it's a bit late. That ship has sailed. So £921 million currently goes to the EU.
6.4 billion will come back into this country if you.
But my number has happened, June.
It will happen. Have faith in your country, Mr. O'Brien.
I do. So, June, when's the bit when you told, for example, because you ended up, I think, as an MEP with the Brexit Party. When was the bit when you told voters that you knew the deal was going to be rubbish? And was that before or after Farage decided to stand down candidates in friendly constituencies?
Jones, I'm not going to go on. You've got a thing about Nigel, haven't you? You really have got.
Only one of us has got him in the Twitter banner on our Twitter pages.
Yeah, you've repeated that piece from me going back years ago.
Yes.
Why can't you now?
Let's not talk about me. I didn't make any promises to voters.
No, but you.
When did you tell them?
Then?
When did you tell them that it was going to be a really bad deal? When did you tell them? Because you just told my listeners that.
But Nick, can I get a word? Listen, I didn't realise. Right, please, may I just say something? I thought our Prime Minister, our government, was going to take back. We were promised that they would take back full control of our waters and the resource. If they had done that, James, we would be in a very different position.
But I explained to you in 2018 why that was impossible.
James, please let me just finish.
Well,
right.
OK, but
so
you're not making any sense, June.
Oh, no, because you won't let me get this across.
All right, so if only we just believed more.
Yeah, what do you want to talk about? The fact that what we should have been, if we had taken back control, what part of this conversation can I get over? If we'd have taken back full control of our resource and the fish, we would be in a completely different position.
And who would we be selling it to?
Well, the biggest problem we have in our country, James, is that we should be selling it to our in our supermarkets instead of all the farmed fish that they sell. You know, bass from Vietnam. You know, prawns from dikes in Thailand.
Yes.
You know, that's something the government had.
And was Brexit ever going to make any of that better?
I mean, Norway sell their fish to 149 different countries. James, selling fish is not a problem.
Where will we sell ours?
The problem is, pardon?
Where will we sell ours?
We'll sell it to France. We'll sell it to Holland. They'll need it. They've got big.
You know what the problem
James,
is there. No, June. No. I will let you finish, but you can't sell it if you're not allowed to catch it.
Well, we're talking about the deal. I'm going back to what should have happened. What we were promised. This is a big deal. You know, at the moment, Boris has lied about wallpapers and different things, but he lied to us.
June, you made the promises to the British people.
No, I didn't make.
Yes, you did. You stood for office in Nigel's party.
did we promise?
You promised that we'd take back control. People said that's impossible. You said no, it isn't, and here we are.
Well, it isn't. It was not impossible.
It was.
But our government are weak and spineless and did not take back full control. If we'd have taken back and had the fish, we'd have sold it to France and Holland. They've got
Can't do that without a trade agreement.
So they've got huge factories, James, and employees to pay. Where would they have got the fish from? Us. It's standard business sense, James. Don't try and make it look... Don't try and twist it.
I'm not twisting anything. We can't sell fish that we're not allowed to catch.
We're not allowed to catch... Well, listen, what I'm trying to say is we're quite happy as a coastal... as an island of catching our own fish in our waters and selling it.
Yes,
we're happy in our waters.
But I explained to you 3 years ago that the massive majority of the fish that we sold, we were catching in other waters because we don't like to eat the oily fish.
The reason we weren't catching it in our waters is because we weren't allowed to catch our fish.
And now we're not even allowed to fish in the waters that we were allowed to fish in before, which is the whole point of today's story from Hull, isn't it, June? The UK fisheries are lobbying the government that don't shout.
We wanted rid of that.
Please don't shout.
Rid of the Tia Keller.
Please don't shout.
I've got an earset in.
The government are being lobbied.
The Tia Keller is a flagship. It's a Dutch vessel. It's British registered and owned by the UK, James.
Yes,
please.
Which means that it is subject to UK rather than EU legislation. Let me just hear you making a little promise before the election. Let's just go back in time again, June, if you'll allow.
We are taking back full control of our waters and the resource. It's as simple as that.
See, that's a promise. Who broke it?
Our government broke it,
But
James.
you made it.
What do you mean I made a promise?
Well, I'll remind you again. Have another listen.
We are taking back full control of our waters and the resource. It's as simple as that.
We wanted to do. And
what do you say to people who voted for you? What do you say to people who voted for you? Are you going to say sorry?
Well, sorry, I didn't do the deal.
Hang on, this is the promise you made.
We are taking back full control of our waters and the resource. It's as simple as that.
Wasn't simple, was it?
Simple.
Didn't happen, did it?
Made it difficult. It's the most simplest thing that you could do. I sat in an office in Lowestoft with Boris, and he promised me we would take back full control of our waters. That is what he told me.
And I told you that was impossible in March of 2018. I told you that was impossible in March of 2018, and you got cross about the facts and figures, didn't you? So anyway, before you go, I don't want to keep you from your meeting. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well is Brexit going for the fishing industry?
Industry dreadful.
A scale of 1 to 10.
I don't know, really, James. I mean, I'm still working on it daily, but really,
I know, but at the moment, scale of 1 to 10.
8. Badly.
So,
bad. It's bad for us at the moment.
With 10 as the worst it could possibly be, it's currently an 8. You know, I have to put £10 in a tin for charity every time I say I told you so in the context of Brexit, June.
Well, yeah, but that's not quite right, is it? You've twisted
Keith,
that.
Get the tin. June Mummery, I told you so. The question of why that fantasy Brexit box that had so much plastered on the side of it that slowly got peeled off over the course of the last 5 years, £350 million for the NHS, peel that one off. We'll get rid of red tape. Well, we'll peel that one off. Absolutely no problem at all in Northern Ireland. It's just scaremongering and troublemaking to suggest that when the withdrawal from the single market and the customs union comes face to face with the Good Friday Agreement, it's hard to see how both can survive. Tear that one off. That's not happened. Job losses won't happen. Well, they have. Tear that one off. What's left? What's left in the box, Bob? We've got some fish and a blue passport, James. All right, cool. And now we learn that there's no fish in it either. So, I mean, the grim fact is, of course, the elephant in the room is immigration stroke racism, because everyone who pretended that they cared about fishermen was really just falling for the line that I can't really come out yet and just say that I don't like foreigners. Those were the calls we took that were perhaps the most indicative, the people saying that they were going to vote for Brexit because of all the Muslims, or the people voting for Brexit because of all the brown faces on the tills in Sainsbury's. But, you know, I get one call like that for every million people that's privately and secretly thinking it but are too ashamed to say it out loud. And that, of course, was the great triumph of Farage, is that he made people like that too ashamed to say it out loud. He somehow provided them with cover and with camouflage, which is why I still find it so sad that people like our last caller, June in Lowestoft, fell for it, because eventually you're going to run out of people to blame. And for every finger that you point at somebody else, there are 3 fingers pointing back at you. But as a voter, as a punter, if you were the kind of person that honestly felt that you were voting to help Fisherfolk, how are you processing the news that they're worse off than they were before, and will continue to be so for the foreseeable future? Greg's in Dublin. Greg, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Greg.
How you doing? I just ringing in relation actually with your last caller prompted me to ring. I think the depths of self-delusion are phenomenal.
Yes.
I think there needs to be a little bit of maybe a historical lesson and some reality check. When Britain and Ireland joined the EU back, or the European community as it was in 1973, they were given a period of time under what was called at that time the Hague Agreement to build up their fishing capacity and to build up their quota capacity, because at the time there were various fish like mackerel and herring which were called pressure stocks, and they were under real pressure. The stocks were falling. There's a thing called the International Convention on the Law of the Sea. It's a United Nations organisation, and they set what are called total allowable catches for each part of the sea, each block of the seas. And the European Union negotiated among the member states how much of each piece of that total allowable catch for each species each country would get. And Britain and Ireland were given a period of time, because they were only joining, to build up their capacity and to build up their stocks. And a couple of things happened. First, both governments decided that fishing industry was not a priority at the time, so they didn't invest. Secondly, there were people who were in the industry decided that they had an opportunity to sell off their capacity to foreign countries who were more interested in fishing. So you had Spanish, German, Dutch and some French companies buying up British vessels. In the 80s, there were over 100 British vessels that were actually flags of convenience vessels that were operating directly in and out of Vigo in Spain. But that was not a government policy. That was the industry itself deciding to make a quick buck by selling off both their boats and their quotas.
This was the most overlooked element of the whole conversation. And I used to sit here some days thinking, it can't be as simple as you are now explaining it, Greg. How can Farage, for example, be wanging on about fishing rights without mentioning that we've flogged most of them? And yet, here we are. Here we are.
That's exactly the point. This would be like you saying, I've sold you my house, now I want the garden back.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you can't do this.
And you heard June, and like a lot of people, well, actually, maybe not a lot of people, but I feel more sympathy for her than some of my correspondents. I still see her as one of the conned rather than one of the con men or con women, but she still thinks that the fact that these ships are foreign owned is an argument on her side of the debate, whereas in fact it was a reason why all the promises made about fishing were at best fatuous and at worst downright fraudulent.
Exactly. Add to that the fact that, as you have said time and again, Europe is the biggest market. The biggest market in fish is in fresh fish. It's not in processed fish. It's actually in fresh fish. And that place is Germany, France and Spain. And they want fresh herring, fresh mackerel. They want it landed directly. So, you know, the idea that you can somehow pull out of that market, turn your back on it and then say, we still want to be able to sell into it, but we're not going to abide by the rules, is a joke. You have a market of nearly 500 million people that the United Kingdom has turned its back on, but says we still want to be actually able to sell whatever products we want into that. That's the fallacy that has been sold to the British people, that you can actually walk away from membership but still have all the benefits.
And that's presumably what's happened in this Norway negotiation is that they marched in they marched in and demanded the earth, and the Norwegians just said, nah.
Good luck.
Yeah.
But this is not negotiation. This is the tantrum of a 2-year-old child. I want.
Yes.
But yeah, it's a negotiation.
And the only weapon they had, just to make sure I've understood it completely, is that the UK negotiators could have within their rights to turn around and say, all right, then you can't sell into our country, and then there'd be no cod at all.
Exactly. But the thing is, and I'm afraid, for two island nations, our consumption of fish is appallingly low in any of them.
Well, that's something we could all agree on. You, me and June. We should all eat more fish.
Absolutely. It's one of the best. But it's just the idea of how grown adults, how grown adults could believe the lies that were told. Unless you were willingly And it's like you can only be duped if to some extent you want to be duped.
Yes,
I think
and that's why the immigration shadow is cast over all of this. But I'm a little more generous perhaps than you are to people who fell for it, because Farage was a very, very, very effective liar. You know, I would have thought back in the day that being on the relevant committee for protecting the interests of the UK fishing fleet and not turning up would have been a fairly reliable indicator of how much he had their interests at heart. But you just heard June in Lowestoft still really holding a torch for him as he carves a new career, I think, recording happy birthday messages for people on social media. I'm not ready yet, and you're more than like, listen, it's my job, it goes with the territory. You can hurl as many rotten fish at me as you please, but I still see people like June Mummery as victims of a con rather than perpetrators of it, although I grant you that the promises made to the public and to the fishing fleets in particular have been summarily broken, and it does sound a little ridiculous for her to blame Boris Johnson or indeed the Vote Leave government for the breaking of these impossible promises. But until you're prepared to accept that the promises were always impossible, I don't know. I don't know what the breakout, what it looks like. The weirdest thing of all for me, as someone who, I think you'll allow me to say, enjoyed a fair degree of coverage of some of the things that are now coming true, is that the fishing industry in purely economic terms was never that important. So the line that it employed fewer people than Harrods seemed to me to be very, very pertinent, because when fishing appeared to be all that was left, so it would be, yeah, all right, hospitality's probably going to take a kicking, retail's probably going to take a kicking, the financial services is taking the mother of all kickings. All of this is still to come when the COVID crisis passes. But all of the obvious losses, frictionless trade, hasn't happened. There is no frictionless trade with the European Union. I mean, that is, for me, probably the biggest con of all. That phrase only entered the British vocabulary as a direct result of Brexiters telling you how important and how easy it would be to have frictionless trade. Well, we don't have it. We have trade barriers with our biggest market. The polar opposite of what you were promised. The polar opposite. So the reason why it was important to point out the relative paucity of fishing's contribution to the national economy was because we believed it was true that fishing might get better. This is why I'm afraid I still have some sympathy with people like June Mummery, some sympathy, up until the point where the denial of reality becomes undeniable. But the point about the fishing industry not being as big as Harrods in the context of the UK economy was that why are we putting all our eggs in this particular basket? Okay, it didn't cross my mind, I've got to be honest with you, that the fishing industry would come out of this much worse or measurably worse. I thought they'd probably be able to cobble something together that was more or less the same, you know, but the idea that it was worth doing all of the other bad stuff for the supposed good stuff that would happen to fishing just didn't make sense. It would be like having scales and then having 1 gram on one side and 1 kilogram on the other side and claiming that they were balanced. The fishing was the gram, except there's not even a gram. There's you put another 10. Actually, I'll drop this analogy now. I think it's done its work. So I don't know if you'll call me if you were screaming at me in 2018 for being unfair to June, or for... I wasn't actually listening back, but ever so polite and calm and kindly. But why have you suddenly stopped caring about the fisher folk that you claimed to care about so passionately when I was explaining to you why they weren't a particularly big part of the overall Brexit picture? What was it about fishing that became so totemic? Is it those phrases? You still hear them. Independent coastal state. Well, we're an independent coastal state that relies upon waters that belong to another independent coastal state for the bulk of the fish that we actually eat. So how was this ever going to go any differently? Answer, of course, it wasn't. Take a few more calls on this, and we are actually going to get onto the road haulage scenario as well, because as we discovered from our friends at Hotel and Catering News earlier in the week, it's the trade magazines and the trade bodies that are having to report and reflect the reality that much of the mainstream Vote Leave supporting media is obviously compelled to ignore. If I'd spent the last few years telling you that Brexit was a good idea and Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy, what the hell would I be talking about on the programme at the moment? What genuinely, what would I be talking about on the radio if I couldn't admit to you the scale of my error in bigging up Boris Johnson and encouraging you to support Brexit or to vote for Brexit? I honestly don't know. I mean, everywhere you turn, trade deal ratification could lead to pressure on Good Friday Agreement. No, we can't talk about that. Crikey. No chance. UK and Norway failed to reach fishing deal. No. We can't talk about that. What are we going to talk about? Fishermen abandoned over Norway cod. Oh, God, no, we can't talk about that. Convenience stores having to ration deliveries because they haven't got the drivers to deliver. Oh, God, no, don't mention that. Restaurants and bars up and down the country reporting that they can't fill vacancies because people just aren't here anymore. Yeah, but I told you that would be a good thing because some of these foreigners committed crimes sometimes. Right, what the hell are we going to talk about on the programme today? Keith, anything? Thankfully, I haven't spent the last few years telling you that Boris Johnson is a stand-up guy and Brexit is a brilliant idea. I spent the last few years telling you the polar opposite, which is why, to paraphrase that famous line from Jaws, it's possible that we're going to need a bigger tin. Erica is in Lambeth. Erica, what's going on?
I just actually wanted to point out, the whole thing is awful, dreadfully sad. These fishermen have been conned, the UK has been conned. But essentially what's happened is Norway has taken back control of its fishing. Norway isn't some little country. It's got one of the biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world.
Yes, it has. Because of oil, I think. Because of because of oil.
And they're going to move away from that, as countries are going to have to do in the future. So they will want to have industries in place, like fishing, farming, that are sustainable. They won't want people going into their waters and taking their fish.
So Norway hasn't moved. Norway remains in the single market. It remains in the European Economic Area. Is it in Schengen?
No idea. I don't think so.
Oh, I thought you were Norwegian. I thought you were ringing in from a Norwegian perspective. But it's certainly, if it's in the European Economic Area, then it has full freedom of movement of people, doesn't it, across the whole of the European Union and attendant areas. So they've changed absolutely nothing. So by dint of Brexit, we've actually given back control.
Correct.
To Norway.
Correct.
When previously the control was pulled. To be fair, it's still pulled with 28 or 29 other countries, so that treaty remains. But obviously the specifics of the fishing deal have seen us surrender access to waters that are Norwegian in return for...
nothing.
It's actually less than nothing.
Yes.
Which is, a philosophical proposition, perhaps, rather than a commercial one. But it is now for these fishermen. They've got less than what they had before.
And I believe that the fishermen that are mostly affected are in Scotland. And so, Cummings, Johnson, Gove, Matthew Elliott, Farage, Banks, Wigmore, they're all helping the breakup of the union.
Well, that is one way, perhaps, in their warped minds of making Britain great again. I honestly don't know. I mean, there comes a point where your nose is so close to the emperor's naked buttocks that to pretend that he's still got some clothes on becomes an act of... epic effort rather than something that's forgivable by dint of the effort put into conning you. And we have to be careful because we're in purdah election-wise, but national polls around show that none of this is forward. Huge swathes of the country still think, because of all the effort put into that catchphrase, get Brexit done, they still think it was a good thing to do. There's no mystery here. Wherever you sit with regards to national party politics, there's no mystery here. Millions of people still think it was a really good idea because they kept being told it was a really good idea. It's only when someone as honest as June sort of falls apart in public that you realise how flimsy the foundations of this conviction always were. But the other point that has to be made, and I know that some of you who sail in similar vessels to me when it comes to such matters don't like this, but the massive majority of the country are not fishermen or farmers or food exporters or SMEs with a large customer base in continental Europe. And it is therefore not as significant as it may seem during the course of a conversation like the ones we're having today. Which makes me wonder why you suddenly, apparently, don't care about the fishermen, the fisherfolk, because you've done this thing, you voted for this thing. It became pretty clear a few years after voting for it that the only benefit you were going to be able to trumpet was somehow improving the plight, the situation of the fishing fleets. They've now got measurably and demonstrably worse. So who are you going to get cross with? Me? Probably. Peter's in Oxford. Peter, what do you think?
Well, James, hi. I mean, your question, yes, Norway is in Schengen.
Is it?
Even though it's not in the EU.
Yes. No, I presumed it was, actually, but there we are. Carry on.
But coming back to what you said earlier, the ratio between a gram and a kilogram,
Yes.
very good comparison. Fishing is worth $1 billion. GDP is about it was just over 2 trillion before coronavirus. So it's a ratio of roughly 2,000 to 1.
Yeah, it's incredible. So why did it become so hugely inflated, do you think, in the course of these conversations and processes? There's something emotional about it, right? I mean, it is a little bit rule Britannia, Britannia waves the rules.
It's the intrepid fisherfolk who are out there on the high seas, and you can see why people have sympathy. But in the hard reality, what I was going to say to you was Norwegians are not turkeys and they don't vote for Christmas.
Well, precisely.
And the previous caller,
Peter, I do apologise. The phone line's gone south, and coincidentally, it means I'm almost on time for the latest break. Lots of people wanted to talk about this, but I'm going to be honest, you weren't until June rang in. So I can't claim I've done my job very well, because my question once again is, why don't you care more about the fact that you've been conned? Or why don't you care more about the fishermen and fisherwomen that you claimed up until, December 2019? Were in the very forefront of your thoughts when you were doubling down upon your decision to vote for Brexit. And if you want to have a crack via text to 84850, if I hadn't spent the last few years telling you the truth about Brexit and Boris Johnson, what would I be doing on the show? Any suggestions? Because we might have something fun to do, something light-hearted to do at 12. If I'd spent the last few years telling you that Brexit was a brilliant idea and Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy, what would be a topic today? Text it to 84850, and if it's funny, we'll do it from 12. There's some rather good suggestions coming in, actually. Although this is rather fun from Jack, who's in London. He goes, Farage knew Brexit would destroy the fishing industry. It was all a ploy to get revenge on that dolphin that beat him in that election. Do you know what? I'd have laughed out loud at that a few years ago, but these days, well, it could actually be the truth. Lots of other... electric scooters. Yeah, I don't know whether you're joking or not, Gary, but I like electric scooters as a topic. Sven from Swiss Cottage could have helped shine some light on the Norwegian fishing industry. That's a real LBC enthusiast joke. That was when the late, great Peter Cook used to ring the live, great Clive Bull and pretend to be a Norwegian fisherman called Sven. And if you've never listened to those exchanges, you can find them on the internet. They're just comedy. Absolute comedy gold. What would we be talking about on the show if I'd spent the last few years telling you that Brexit was a great idea and Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy? Probably about not how Robin Salford says, probably about how many government buildings are not flying the Union flag, James. Another one suggests that I'd be screaming something vaguely racist about Meghan Markle. Yeah, I mean, this is quite good. I haven't got the name on it, oddly, but someone who got a parking ticket in Oxford about 5 years ago that was really unfair and they'd quite like to talk about. And cycle lanes is probably the most popular at the moment, but that one is being an influencer a real job? That's a nice one. Eleanor in Caterham says, please do the topic of tattoos you regret having done. You did this about 10 years ago, and it was a hilarious programme, and I quite like this. It was Ollie in Oxford who had that parking ticket 5 years ago, and I quite like this. What is the best thing? What is the best thing? Sadly, we will, or not sadly, I'll take some of those under advisement. But in many ways, once again, I find myself asking you why you're not cross with the people who set fire to your hair. And the answer, they didn't set fire to my hair, doesn't count anymore because I can smell it from here. Daniel's in Chichester. Daniel, what's going on?
Yeah, well, same old, isn't it?
Well, no, it's not. I mean, well, it is and it isn't. It's like a new same old. I don't know. Same day.
Yes, I suppose. I mean, thinking long and hard about, what do people see in fisheries and fishing rights being sort of top of the argument list.
Why did that happen? I mean, I don't think I think it's interesting to work out. It's too late to do anything about it. But why did fishing end up being so inflated in the debates, in the conversation?
I think it represents borders, James.
Right, go on.
You know, it's the territorial waters. It's, you know, having access and not seeing foreign boats trawling around, all that lot.
So that kind of image of angry French fishermen fighting with angry English fishermen, and somehow
absolutely throwing bottles, and all that.
But again, the scale of it, how could that be outweighing all of the areas that people began to accept quite early on were going to be worse than they were before?
Well, because that's not important. You know, it's not as clear. I mean, we're a country that's driven by a service industry, aren't we?
Yes, of course we are.
So, you know, and that's not.
Well, we were. I don't know how long that's going. I don't know how long that's going to sustain for, given that services weren't covered at all in the so-called oven-ready deal.
Yes, and you know, service industry doesn't really materialise itself the way that, you know, a trawler would, or a lorry would, or a tractor would. So there weren't or a border would.
So so you've got someone living in the middle of the country, living in, I don't know, Dudley, miles from the sea. They're persuaded to vote for Brexit because they think it's going to help the fishermen. What they're really voting for is a form of Donald Trump's border wall. They so fishing fleets just become an emblem of something deeper psychologically, and somehow this phrase "independent coastal state," coupled with sticking up for our fishermen, it was actually an invitation to cut ourselves off a little more from frightening foreign faces.
Not have people, you know, coming over and, you know, kind of disrupting our little society that we're used to. And, you know, and then, fair enough, regardless on which side of the argument you're on, in terms of, you know, pro-EU and whatnot, it's just you're left with a bunch of people trying to negotiate the next stage in the process, and that's a bunch of people, I'm sorry, but frankly, I think that they couldn't negotiate the way out of a garden gazebo.
A garden gazebo. In order to pay homage to my late father, a wet paper bag was always one of his. He couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag, and that's the weirdest thing. So the fellow that negotiated this deal that June Mummery, I think, correctly has described as rubbish, although the inevitability of its rubbishness is something she's not yet ready to accept. Boris Johnson's just put him in the House of Lords. And what's the stupidest thing you've ever done at work and got promoted for? That could be our topic from 12. Actually, looking for something funny that we could do if I'd spent the last few years telling you that Brexit was a great idea and Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy, because I don't know what the hell I'd be talking about from the news at the moment. 4 inquiries now into Boris Johnson's... Well, you see, here's the thing. If I say, do you care about Boris Johnson's curtains and who paid for them? You probably go, no, not really. If I say to you, do you care about a UK Prime Minister taking money from a mysterious source and refusing to disclose the full details of the deal? Well, then you'd be nuts to say no, although Nadine Dorries did earlier in the week, of course. I'm not sure that disproves my theory. It is an astonishing state of affairs. Do you care about the UK Prime Minister taking money from a mysterious source on terms that he refuses to disclose? But, of course, you put it through the mill of some right-wing media, not all, because the Daily Mail have played an absolute blinder on this. I'll say it before and I'll say it again, because I recorded an interview with an old pal of mine, Peter Oborne, one of the most honest people, I think, to ply the journalist trade that I've ever encountered. And he was at great pains to remind me to sing the praises of Simon Walters of the Daily Mail, because he was tirelessly and almost single-handedly investigating this story. And he is a very senior member of the Daily Mail's team. So although I still harbour many issues with much of the Daily Mail's project, you've got to give credit where it's due, otherwise you're as bad as the people you criticise. The team you don't support plays a blinder, you've got to stand up and applaud, right? Otherwise you become as dumb as the people who are going to cheer their own side when they're doing terrible things and boo the opposition when they're playing absolute beauties. Let's go to Eastbourne again. Michael is there. Michael, what's going on? What do you think?
Well, I think this is a result of Captain Boris taking the ship up to the wire on Christmas Eve at 5 o'clock. And he was more interested in showing the EU that we won't be pushed around and we're Rule Britannia and that, and it just blusted his way through till Christmas Eve. No interest in detail, no interest in the border down the Irish Sea and so on. Sold the loyalists down the river and sold the fishermen up into the sea.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to give you any prizes for insight here, because I mean, the only mystery I have is how anyone can still be denying what you've just described.
Yeah, well, it's appalling, really. I mean, when you actually think that some European countries actually celebrate Christmas on Christmas Eve, and he actually, to actually take the European Union to and would treat them with such disdain as to kind of,
But I guess we, to use the term very, very loosely, we like that, and this notion that we were going to march. I mean, you remember people like Brexit hardman Steve Baker and Mark Francois were talking as if we were the ones with 600 million members and they were the ones with 60. So we were going to march in there and tell them what was what and lay down the law. What I find, it's not baffling because we could both explain it in a single sentence, but the idea that the fellow who negotiated this gets promoted to the House of Lords, that's like something that would happen in a banana republic, whether they were bendy or straight.
Well, that's the nature, twisted nature and corrupt nature of this, regime.
Morally corrupt, yeah. I mean, you have to have that because the promises they made have gone. Flags, I suppose. But, I mean, that had nothing to do with it. Vaccines, we should mention vaccines. The vaccine procurement that was undertaken while we were still fully subject to European Union rules is proof of what a brilliant idea it is to leave the European Union. People are reduced to arguing that. Guess how many vaccinations Germany undertook yesterday? And I'll tell you why I hate this statistic. Germany did 1.1 million individual vaccinations in a single day yesterday. It vaccinated 1% of their population. So while it will never not be a good thing that we got a head start, by making it nationalist, by turning it into an issue, by trying to tie it fraudulently and despicably to Brexit, there'll be people listening to this programme now who go, oh, damn, Germany's done well. And there are. You might be one of them. I bear you no malice. I'm here to help you towards the light. But it's great that we got a head start on the vaccines. It's even greater if everybody else catches up really quickly because, well, unless your flag is more important than your life, unless your passport is more important than your humanity, then, well, you can fill in the gaps yourself. Well, another story now. So we move from fishing to road haulage, and I have to tell you that if you want to know what's going on, then because so much of the media spent the last few years telling you that Brexit is a brilliant idea and Boris Johnson is a stand-up guy, then you have to go directly to either the trade media or trade bodies in the context of all manner of issues. So, it's only a slightly tongue-in-cheek question when I said to you, what the hell are we going to talk about? What would we talk about on the programme if we were part of that sort of cabal, that media cabal of people? Because I wouldn't want to be sitting here telling you, fishermen have been absolutely shafted, farmers have been absolutely shafted, financial services have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. There was another factory closed with 600 jobs this week. What was that? It's just slipped my mind. But you're not going to see this reported. If something happens that is vaguely the same as what was happening before, it's going to be held up as a big win. It'll be, you said that this business would go down by 50%. It's only gone down by 49%. Project Fear was all lies. So, we have to keep trying, but we also have to be conscious that there are other things going on and there are other reasons for bad things happening. Once the coronavirus catastrophe is taken into account, there will still be other reasons why bad things are happening. But I was struck by a story earlier in the week about a shortage of drivers causing delays to next day deliveries. I checked with my friend who owns my local convenience store, one of my local convenience stores, and he hadn't seen the story but was aware of some problems in the supply chain. Gaps on shelves, I don't know, but, if there's a shortage of drivers, you do not have to be a genius to realise that is going to damage deliveries. Rod Mackenzie is the Chief Executive of the Road Haulage Association, and just like UK Fisheries, Rod, you are calling upon the government for some action. What do you want, and why do you want it?
Historic of lorry drivers in this, simply because people don't want to be lorry drivers, and we've relied in a very large extent on European lorry drivers over the past few years, and because of Brexit, they've decided to buy.
Right, but Rod, I'm going to stop you there. We're going to try and fix your phone line, then we're going to bring you back and start again. My apologies to you and to everybody listening for the little glitches on the line there. It is categorically never the fault of my colleagues at LBC. It is just one of those things that happens in the passage from production office to on-air studio. But I do want to get to the bottom of this, and I do want to see if there's anything that we can amplify in the hope of helping. But with the time at 11:37, I can run you through some of the details that Rod will flesh out for us. Simply put, there are cabs that do not have drivers in them. And Rod Mackenzie, we'll try again. You can tell us why, and you can tell us what you want. But take it from the top, if you would, Rod.
Well, I hope you can hear me this time, James.
There we go. That's it.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, well, historically, there has been a shortage of lorry drivers in this country. Not many Brits want to do the job. Variety of reasons for that, but we've relied a lot on European lorry drivers, and because of Brexit, many of them have decided to go home, and there's been a change to the self-employment tax laws recently, which has also meant that other lorry drivers, and indeed more of the Europeans, have gone home.
Right.
Or are
That's the IR35, isn't it?
It is indeed.
That's hit lots of us.
And that is causing a major problem, because what's happened is we've had localised strikes and work to rules and self-furloughing, and that has meant that some of the delays, some of the shortages that we've talked about just get worse and worse. And the danger is that begins to impact on the supply chain. You know, we've got hospitality restarting in May. Other things will be happening, yes. And more people want stuff delivered. And as you say, if the lorry drivers aren't there to do the job, we've got a massive problem. So, yeah, there are a few things we want the government to do, and they need to do it urgently. And I can run through those if it's helpful.
You can have all the time you want, Rod, actually. So don't feel... No, seriously, I mean, at least up until the next break at 11:45. So okay, just tell my listeners what you think they most need to know about your sector's current problems and plight.
I'll do that. Thanks, James.
Okay.
Firstly, there is a massive backlog of driving tests. Now, driving tests for everyone, but the particular worry is for vocational drivers, right. Lorry drivers. Yes. Literally thousands of tests have not been done because of COVID. And we are arguing that the government needs to put maximum priority on vocational drivers to clear that backlog. I know it'll be inconvenient for other learner drivers to have to wait a bit longer, but it's really important that wannabe lorry drivers get their tests and we can get them behind the wheels of lorries that deliver stuff to the rest of us. Urgent.
Right.
Secondly, we have got the RHA, for example, has its own Road to Logistics recruitment and training program, and there are others as well. Hundreds of would-be lorry drivers are desperate to work, but the tests mean they can't get those all-important HGV licenses. We've also got a problem with the occupation shortage list.
Yes.
Lorry drivers are not on that list, and we're insisting that the government puts lorry drivers on the list, as with occupations like doctors and nurses, for example.
Let me pause you there, if I may, because if lorry drivers were earning £36,700 a year and could prove that they had a position in place before coming here, they would be allowed to. So some people listening to the programme would suggest to you that, well, you know, you're just going to have to pay more. If you pay that sort of money, you will be able to get them, whether they're coming from the UK or from overseas.
Yeah, it's a fair point, and I understand that. But we're talking about a lot of small companies here, which have got 1, 2, 3 lorries and very, very tight
profit margins, maybe 1%, 2%. Now, that's typical in road haulage. It's not typical in the rest of the world,
Right.
but it is typical in this particular profession. And therefore, if you're asking a company with that sort of a very tight profit margin to increase wages that they can't afford to pay, then you're looking at them going out of business. So that would be sort of self-defeating. I think what we need to understand, and what the government needs to understand, it's not how much you're paid that determines your worth to the country. It's the job you do, and whether there is an existing shortage of British people who are willing and able to do that.
Yes.
So that is the argument for why we think we should be on the occupation shortage list. It's something that Priti Patel didn't agree with, although we did have some support elsewhere in government. But it is essential that we allow EU and other foreign drivers to fill some of these gaps in the rota. We accept, by the way, that there's a massive driver shortage anyway in the EU. And that doesn't help. But what we're saying is EU and foreign drivers are needed. So that's another point. The other point that I think is worth making to your listeners is about the apprenticeship levy. We've paid about £500 million into the levy as a group of people that you might call road haulage or logistics, and we've got back just 50 million. Now, that's a very unfair payout for an industry with a critical staff and youth shortage, and we think we should be entitled to more of that to help start apprenticeships and driver training. And just on that, guess how much it takes to train a lorry driver? Well, I'll give you the answer because it's probably best if I do.
You're never going to get a second career as a quiz show host, Rod. I hope you realise that.
I passed on that a long time ago. It costs £7,000 to train a lorry driver, which is an awful lot of money for small firms who've just been describing to pay for, and therefore, apprenticeship levy funding for that training would make a heck of a difference. And a simple human point: we can't expect people to want to join the trucking industry if there are very few toilets, washing facilities, or safe and secure parking. And we've also got councils like, for example, in Kent, very hostile to lorry drivers and closing lay-bys and so forth. And one of the arguments is, they make a mess and, they leave litter and waste and so forth, which is obviously not good. But one of the reasons why people behave in that way is if there are no other facilities.
Yes.
People leave litter if
because
there are no
bins
to put rubbish in. So I would always say, look at how many toilets are available. Look at the wash facilities. Because of COVID, we know how important this stuff is. Yes. And safe and secure parking can be terrifying. Sleeping overnight in a truck. If you've got a gang of organised criminals trying to cut their way into your load in the back, it's not good.
It's a bleak
those are the
picture.
things that we really need, and it's time that if we value the things we receive in this country, and they're delivered on time and promptly despite a whole host of problems, it's really time that we valued the people who do that delivery.
It's a bleak picture that you paint, and if I've learned anything over the last few years, it's caveating what follows now with the phrase worst case scenario, or hopefully this won't happen, or hopefully only some bits of it will happen. And if it doesn't all happen immediately, then it's not in any way proof or evidence or emblematic of you not being honest or telling the truth. This is one of the many areas of public discourse that Brexit has completely broken. But what does the future look like if the government completely ignores you?
Well, what will happen is that the driver shortage will get worse. More and more drivers, as we're already seeing, will leave. And then we will start to see the effect of that, which is things that won't be delivered. And so when people notice that their cornflakes are not in the supermarket, or their online delivery doesn't arrive, or whatever it is, that's when, the rumbles will begin. And you're talking about your local convenience store, and we'll have to see. And whether that guy notices in the next few weeks that there are more and more glitches to what he's hoping to have to sell to you and me. That is the effect. And it's difficult to know, because I don't have a crystal ball, exactly what that would look like. But that is the logic of what is happening. And the government can ignore us, as they have been doing continually up to now, or they can act. And the worry is that something really, really bad has to happen for the government to do something. And that's a shame. You don't need to be in that place. You can act now and head this off at the pass.
Just one thought, Rod, before you go. Have you thought of pretending to be a statue? Because then there are many members of the Cabinet who'd be galloping to your defence at the very first opportunity.
Well, it's probably a better career option for me than a game show host or a quizmaster.
Yes, Rob Mackenzie, Chief Executive of the Road Haulage Association there, just providing a fairly clear list of things that his sector needs in order to remember, because this is crucial, and I apologise for making this point repeatedly, but it is the most important point of all. That's what his sector needs in order to stay roughly where they were a couple of years ago. Not to improve. Well, actually, some of that would improve the situation on where they were a couple of years ago. But in terms of driver shortages, that's where we need to get back to where we were before the graph started dipping. Given that fans of this programme are probably as fond as I am of stories that just make you stop and do a double take, the favourite to take over from Arlene Foster as the leader of the DUP is a creationist who believes the world is only 6,000 years old. I think that dinosaur bones in this worldview, dinosaur fossils, I think the argument is, and I could be wrong, and we may get onto this after 12, that they were put there by God to test our faith. Now, you may snigger, but have a look at America, and it is that level of delusion masquerading as religious belief that explains a large part of Donald Trump's core support. So, now, I said to a caller yesterday, I said, have I ever told you my Morecambe story? Because I am turning into a really rubbish Ronnie Corbett tribute act when it comes to anecdotes and shaggy dog stories. Keith, if you nod that enthusiastically, you might do yourself a mischief. You could end up getting a nosebleed. And Leanopolis on Twitter, who's one of my favourite wags, tweeted to say, memo to self, if James O'Brien ever asks you whether you've heard his fill in the blank as you please story, always answer yes, which is clearly a roundabout way of trying to get me not to share my stories. But my creationist story is actually quite funny, and embarrassing for me, if that possibly tempts you even more. So I may well share that with you after the 12 o'clock news if we get stuck into the questions of what is going on in Northern Ireland, because bizarrely, I think the received wisdom on what did for Arlene Foster was her lack of support for gay conversion therapy, which is quite a remarkable state of affairs. And remember, for now at least, Northern Ireland is in the United Kingdom. So I think, once again, those of us on this side of the Irish Sea are woefully ignorant about the major movements and issues on the other side of the Irish Sea. So I'll try and fix that a little after the 12. So before that, back to the various questions. It's been 2 hours, unexpectedly, on fishing, largely thanks to June Mummery down in Lowestoft. So, genuinely, thank you, June. As a lot of people have pointed out, at least you've got the guts to ring in and seek to explain why all the promises regarding fishing have fallen apart like a flimsy suit. At least she's got the guts to ring in. But the question of why things have gone so badly is perhaps less mysterious as the question of why you've all gone so quiet. If you were in favour of this and you were falling for the fishy faragey line that it was all worth doing because of the fishing industry. So now we know the fishing industry is worse off. What have you got? It was all worth doing because of... And remember, you can't, sadly, I wish you could, but you can't have vaccines because all of the vaccine procurement was undertaken while we were still fully subject to European Union legislation. It was all done during the transition period. So much as I wish you could somehow retrospectively pretend that you voted for Brexit in 2016 because you knew there was going to be a global pandemic in 2020 and that vaccine supply would in the first couple of months be muffed up, vaccine procurement would be muffed up by European Union countries that acted collectively and really excelled by countries that acted independently, I can't sadly let you have that because this is a programme where facts matter more than feelings. No unicorns allowed, it says on the studio door. After 10. Jake's in Sunderland. Jake, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
it
Jake.
doesn't really matter what happens in the eyes of a lot of people. I won't say all people that voted for Brexit.
No.
But a lot of people,
clear.
It's just the slogan of get Brexit done. It's sort of like in America with the Make America Great Again, the what happened in the Capitol and things like that. As long as that slogan is there, and as long as Boris got Brexit, well, supposedly got Brexit over the line,
I mean, there are millions and millions of people who still think that was a great achievement, and you can see why. Again, it's no criticism because Theresa May failed and failed again, and the reasons why she failed were never properly explained by a media that was responsible for putting the country in this parlous position. So then the fact that he got a majority of 80, claimed it was oven ready, got it through Parliament, people aren't looking at the details, they're not really questioning...
Not being allowed to look at the details.
Well, they are allowed to. They're just choosing not to. And frankly, you can't blame them. If you weren't a fisherman or someone who relies upon road haulage or in hospitality or in catering or in financial services or in farming or in food exports or in a few other sectors, you wouldn't be feeling it yet.
I think that's an important point about the fish, is because I believe the reason why they held up the fish as an example of something that's going to be great, is they thought that nobody's going to understand global economics, nobody's going to understand the banking system and stuff like that. The voters aren't going to go for stuff like that. What can we use? Oh, wait, Boris Johnson can hold up a fish at a conference.
He did,
and then we'll just go with that.
But even that was wrong, it turned out. He was even misrepresenting that particular fish that he held up from...
But if you
was it a Channel Island smoky or something? I forget the details.
If you tell people that they're wrong, they'll just go back at you and say, well, you just hate Boris.
You're a sneering, condescending Ramona.
Un-British. It's the same with if you bring up the story of the flat conversion stuff. And I saw on Twitter that people are sharing that the £200,000
up to £200,000. Established £90,000, of which £30,000 was normal.
Yeah, was that it was around the same that the Grenfell Tower. The people that built the redid up the Grenfell Tower was able to save.
I haven't seen that.
Even their reaction to that was not 100% brilliant.
I understand what you're saying. As in, Boris Johnson deserves it. Those people didn't, or something like that.
No.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm not. Nobody deserves to.
No, I know you're not saying that. You're being cryptic about what the reactions are you're describing. But in the context of Grenfell Tower, there is no low to which some people, and you wonder increasingly whether or not we made a mistake over the years by suggesting that social media was not unrepresentative and people would be much more vile than they were in real life on social media. I think that may have been an error, but I didn't know what you were alluding to. But I think it's just a clear comparison, is it, between the cost for one and the cost for the other. And if you've got a problem with the flat refurbishment, then you're somehow unpatriotic.
Obviously, we don't know all the facts about the flat and all of that stuff.
Exactly.
But they'll save and spend as little as they can on poor people and helping them, and save putting in things that won't kill them, but they'll spend as much as they want on something that they think one particular part of voters will go for that isn't about saving anybody's lives or protecting lives.
And we have witnessed it this week with at least two or three callers who really, the first one, was it the fellow in Ware, Mike, who was not only still waving his flag for Johnson, but also under the impression that the election in America really was stolen from Donald Trump. So once you've put yourself in a position where you're not just believing lies that are being told to you by others, but you're lying to yourself, I haven't solved it yet, but I'm going to keep trying for as long as I'm allowed to. How do you help people like that? And the fella yesterday in Croydon who simply didn't understand how journalism worked and believed that his interpretation of how you source a story and avoid libel suits was more valid than any working journalists. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm going to keep trying. Let's hop across the Irish Sea now and find out what is going on over there. I think it would be inappropriate for us not to tie it in with the conversations and contemplations that we've been having about the emerging reality of Brexit, as opposed to the very fishy fantasy that has been peddled across these islands for as long as I can remember, and it's difficult to know where to start. So I'll turn to James Forsyth in the Times today, who explains his view that Arlene Foster's leadership of the DUP was doomed by her ambivalence on gay conversion therapy. Do you know, as a phone-in host, you do sometimes have days why you wonder why you bother. You know, when I started work here, the calls from homophobes who used the Bible to justify their bigotry were great fun, weren't they? And then you spend a few years thinking, well, that ship has sailed, and then back it comes again. The idea that you can find a few lines in Leviticus that somehow justify your really weird obsession with homosexual acts or with gay people, it should have been one that was put to bed years ago. But I think we're guilty. You know, if I was built differently, I'd be, so well, what's wrong with that? Why can't you? Why can't you read bits out of the Bible deliberately? So there's one in the news this week, and I got a message from a pal of mine who sees him regularly and says, seriously, this bloke just stands up reading the vilest bits of the Bible he can find in the hope of winding up local school children. It's like a really weird exercise in attention seeking. But of course, by the time it's been put through the mangle of Daily Express sensibilities, it's masquerading as an attack on Christianity. And that's the kind of Christianity practiced by the kind of conservatives who vote against feeding hungry school children in the school holidays. I know what you're thinking. It doesn't bear any resemblance whatsoever to anything I've seen in the New Testament, but you'll have to take that up with people like Jacob Rees-Mogany and Duncan Smith, because their brand of Catholicism, and I can say this now, having been anointed one of the country's 75 leading Catholics by no less august an organ than the Catholic Herald, I can say this now, is the Catholicism you practice when you're voting against free school meals or free meals for hungry children during the school holidays bears no resemblance whatsoever to anything I've ever come across in church. But it doesn't mean I'm right and you're wrong. Maybe Jesus would have wanted those children to go hungry. Maybe he would have thought food banks were uplifting. Maybe he would have thought that anybody who died in Grenfell Tower did so because they lacked common sense. But again, I struggle to find any evidence of that in the Gospels. But here is somebody apparently basing their judgment upon, quotes, Christianity, end quotes. The argument, the contention is that the practice of trying to change gay people's sexuality by prayer is popular among some evangelical Christians. So when Arlene Foster abstained in a vote to ban it, it went down badly with traditional DUP members. Do not adjust your radio. You are listening to original pirate material. Lock down your... No, don't. You're too old to do anything like any... Whoa, just wind that right in, honestly. You'll be coming back from your holidays claiming that you're back once again like a renegade master if you carry on like this. Lock down. So you are listening to LBC. It is the year 2021 and you are still in the United Kingdom. But yeah, it is argued today in the Times that the leader of the DUP essentially signed her own political death warrant when she abstained. She didn't even vote in favour of banning so-called gay conversion therapy. She simply abstained. But that upset the core support so much that she was left with little choice but to walk the plank. They were also quite unhappy that one of her ministers went to a meeting with a politician from the Irish Republic. So the fear is, of course, that the DUP, which still wields great political power in Northern Ireland, Arlene Foster not only stepped down as the leader of the DUP, but also, of course, as First Minister, leaves a power vacuum into which something much more hardline can move. I know what you're thinking. More hardline than what you just described? And sadly, the answer is yes, and it comes in the form of a man called Edwin Poots, who he's real, as far as I can tell. And he is currently the favourite to take over from Arlene Foster, and among his many contributions to the national pageant is the belief that the world is only 6,000 years old. And this is, again, why I mention to you frequently my own religious faith and my own religious education, because, you know, I was taught from the age of 3 to 7 by nuns, from the age of 13 to 18 by monks, and I've been a churchgoer for most, but by no means all, of my adult life. And I know that some of the stuff that we were taught was not just wrong, but also dangerous, you know. As someone who's benefited from IVF technology, I find the Catholic churches, the popes, continuing I think it's continuing. To be honest with you, I haven't checked recently. Opposition to IVF, baffling and wrong. Similarly, the historical opposition to contraception seems to me to be ridiculous, particularly on a planet that is overpopulated, I think, by most measures. But and this is a very different brand of Christianity. And Catholics are the sworn enemies of many people who subscribe to this brand of Christianity. But why would you need to believe that the Earth was only 4,000 years old? We'll start with that, shall we? Well, I mean, where does this come from? What is the rationale for it? Because I have no idea. 0345 6060973. Here's some of the greatest hits of Edwin Poots. My view on the Earth is that it's a young Earth. My view is 4000 BC. Yeah, and there is something a bit Brexity about that. So you've got the massed ranks of all of humanity's research and science on one side, and on the other you've got a bloke called Edwin Poots who's decided that the planet is only 4,000 years old. Okay? I don't expect you to make sense of it in the clearest sense, the purest sense of the word, but just give me a talk if you're more familiar with this worldview than I am. 0345 6060973. Are you familiar with the Big Bang Theory, as in the planetary origins theory, as opposed to the rather good American sitcom? Okay. Edwin Poots has got no time for the Big Bang Theory. He points out, we've had lots of explosions in Northern Ireland, and I've never seen anything come out of that was good. Keith thinks I'm making this up. This is real, mate. Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist, stands accused of wanting to, and I quote, indoctrinate everyone with evolution. He's also got a problem, as you'd expect, with the Giant's Causeway, which is a rock formation in Northern Ireland consisting of 40,000 interlocking basalt columns. It is estimated by geologists to be up to 60 million years old. It's a popular tourist attraction. Obviously, if you think the world is 4,000 years old, then a tourist attraction on your doorstep, estimated by geologists to be 60 million years old, is going to pose something of a problem. Not to Edwin Poots. I don't believe the Giant's Causeway is 60 million years old, he says. If other people make an issue of that, it's up to them. The Giant's Causeway is a fantastic site, an asset which needs us to sell it and make it marketable. Whatever length of time it has been in existence will not undermine that message. Well, it kind of will, Edwin, mate. Because if it's one of the oldest things I can visit, then I'm going to go and visit it. But if it's just out of the box, then it's less exciting. It is obviously archaeology, geology, history, science that you are troubled by. Anyway, he's running and he's favourite. I'm a proud Northern Ireland man. I love its people and its place, and it faces many challenging times. It's with that in mind I'm putting my name forward for the leadership for the Democratic Unionist Party. Now, I don't want to offend anybody, but I am happy to do so if it's necessary. A lot of people listening to me run through the greatest hits of Edwin Poots are going to think that either I'm making it up or that we have all gone to the moon in a balloon. So what I want from you, if you are more familiar with DUP politics / religion, Northern Irish issues, this entire story, what I want from you is a kind of idiot's guide. I want you to explain to me, and through me to my listeners, how somebody possessed of such, quotes, views, end quotes, can be in pole position, potentially, to be the most powerful position in Northern Ireland at a time when Northern Ireland is under existential threat. I know what you're thinking. Flippin' heck, James, you don't ask for much, do you? To which the answer is, you're damn right. I have much more faith in you than the people who routinely expect you to vote against your own interests by blowing racist dog whistles or tickling some of your unpleasant regions. I am a firm, this is what patriotism is, well, actually it's not, it's what humanitarianism is. A firm believer in your decency and intelligence, even as all the evidence mounts up that people who bet their house on the British public behaving unintelligently and indecently are currently in the driving seat. Just talk me through an idiot's guy. I mean, how the hell can a man possessed of such, quotes, eccentric, end quotes, views be on the brink of assuming the highest office in Northern Ireland? I may have got that wrong. I don't think I have. I think if you become leader of the DUP, as things stand, you become First Minister. Wow. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Now, I'm going to the Daily Mail now, and a commentator who I find mostly ridiculous, but even a stop clock is right twice a day, someone called Leo McKinstry. He writes in the Mail today that if the DUP gets this wrong, it could be death knell for the union. I presume he's a Brexiter, so, any threat to the union that's been caused completely by Brexit will be something that these people are desperate to pretend was somehow unforeseeable, unwarned against, unmentioned and unattributable to Brexit. But his argument has intensified a sense of crisis in the unionist movement, and with the cries for Irish unity being louder than they've been at any point since the end of the Troubles, then they could get this horribly wrong. From their point of view, if you believe in a united Ireland, I suppose it's the opposite of horribly wrong. So shall we crack on? We will. We'll open up. Look at that. Flipping it. Do you know, I just can't stop the phones ringing at the moment. It's getting a bit ridiculous. Honestly. Phew, I said it before and I'll say it again. If I'd spent the last few years bigging up Brexit and banging on about what a stand-up guy Boris Johnson is, I have absolutely no idea what we talk about every day, because we wouldn't even be able to talk about this. DUP, Theresa May, Brexit, peace process, Good Friday Agreement, single market, customs union. You can't talk about it if you've already been proved so horribly wrong about everything that's happened in the last 5 years. I think the gulf between, and the chasm is much bigger than the Irish Sea, between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom is rarely bigger than when we turn to some of the non-political beliefs upon which support for the DUP is built. And the favourite to take over as leader of the DUP is a creationist who seems to oscillate between believing that the world is only 6,000 years old and 4,000. Oh no, 4,000 BC, that's right. So 6,000 years old. And on the question of the Big Bang Theory, he's not convinced. We've had lots of explosions in Northern Ireland, and I've never seen anything come out of that was good. And I'm just sitting here in many ways going, oh? And you're going to respond to that. So today's phone-in topic for the rest of the programme is me saying, huh? And you saying whatever you want to say. We'll start with Maggie, who's in Downpatrick. Maggie, huh?
Hello there, James.
Hello, Maggie. What's going on? Make sense of it all.
Well, of course, absolutely, as a political journalist for the last 40 years. Well, it's very simple. Edwin Putz would be fantastic for the DUP. I don't know how you can't see that. He would be just brilliant, and I'll tell you why.
Yes.
Because
do I sense a portion of tongue landing firmly in cheek here, Maggie?
Paris has thought you don't know anything about my politics, or at least if you do, your memory's better than I would expect it to be. No, listen. The reason Edwin Putz has pitched himself so far forward is because the DUP is terrified of the growth from this little TUV party. I'm not sure you'll have come across it. Most people won't have done. It's an even more extremist form of the DUP.
Right.
And the DUP has been losing votes, to them. So they've been worried about that. So this is why they're making this sort of lurch to the right, and why Arlene's too soft.
So, I mean, that many people over here are going to find that hard to swallow, the idea that Arlene Foster is considered too moderate.
Yes, by this group. Absolutely. I mean, she not only did she dare to abstain on the idea of
gay conversion therapy,
educating, as they might say it. And that's as if that wasn't bad enough. I mean, she even hinted that there's a possibility of talking to people in the heathen capital of Dublin. I mean, she doesn't actually do it herself, but it has been suggested that, she might be interested in talking to one or two people there, but maybe that's a bit of a stretch.
So forgive me for interrupting, but I hope I'm not sounding too stupid, but I think it's important to own one's own ignorance, and I probably know a little bit more about Irish politics than many London-based journalist, but I still know next to nothing, I'm embarrassed to admit. How many people who march into a ballot box and put a cross in the DUP's box would agree with Edwin Poots's view of the world only being 6,000 years old, for example? And I know you can't give me a scientific answer, but just give me a...
I would say 97%.
Oh, my days. Are you serious?
Yes,
okay.
I'm absolutely serious. Don't forget, of course, that the membership of the party don't have a vote in the leadership. The leadership is voted for simply by the MLAs here and the MPs.
Is that why he's the favourite then?
38 of them.
Yeah.
And 23 of them, I think it is, at the last point have backed Poots. So he's going to get in. The membership will get him whether they want him or not. But yes, he probably does reflect that degree of extremism. But the reason why it's so good...
Yes.
And why it will be such, I hope, such a blessing to go into Mr. Poots's territory, is that hopefully what happens is that squeezes the DUP from a, let's hope, slightly more moderate wing, if you can have a moderate wing of the DUP.
Yes.
Slightly softer wing, slightly less fanatical, the professional classes, if you like.
So people who could hold one nostril and back Arlene Foster are not going to be able to hold the other nostril and back Edwin Poots. That's what you're telling me.
That's the group we're talking about.
Yes.
And if that group shifts, the only place that group can go is to the Alliance Party and Naomi Long. Don't know if you've ever had Naomi on. She's a great politician.
I have tried to get her on, but if you see her, will you tell her? We tried to get her on about a month ago, and I don't know, we didn't make contact. I didn't follow it up.
No, that's a pity, because she is very good and very, very sensible.
I know she is.
And I would love to see.
Well, so that's the good news. That's the good news, is that it may squeeze. And obviously, you know, if you're a DUP supporter, then you would completely disagree with Maggie's analysis and my description of it as good news. Do you want the bad news? The bad news is I'm old enough to remember when people thought that UKIP might fatally damage the Conservative Party.
Yes, now that's an interesting parallel,
isn't it? Yeah.
Let's hope that. Of course, we don't exactly have a characterful, charismatic figure like Nigel Farage in the DUP.
No, but what damage could be done? Are you suggesting to me that Edwin Poots is not a smooth operator?
Do you think I'd be suggesting that?
No, I mean, I don't know if it's an unkind thing to say about Edwin Poots, but he looks like someone called Edwin Poots, doesn't he?
Is when you're writing that story, you're thinking, am I sure I've spelt that man's name right?
I know. And I don't know how much of it becomes sort of a form of nominative determinism. Maggie, fantastic. Thank you so much. And the insights gleaned from your years on this beat are welcome and valuable to us all. But I just, for the record, I'm always conscious of being much more ignorant about this area of UK politics than almost any other. Including Scotland. I'm weak on Scottish politics, but I'm a heck of a lot better than I am on Northern Irish politics, and I don't understand why. Because Maggie would appreciate this. When I was, what year would it have been? 83, probably. It was an election in 83, and my school did a mock election, and obviously all the big boys got to be Labour or the Conservatives, and I stood for the SDLP in a mock election at my prep school when I was about 11 years old. And so you'd think if I was that interested in Irish politics when I was 11, I'd be a little bit better informed than I am at the age of 9. But no. So I need people like Maggie to help me, and I need people like Andy, who's in Derry. Andy, fill your boots.
The SDLP, John Hume's party.
Well, yes.
Party to be in.
God rest his immortal soul.
God rest his soul.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Look, James, basically, the DUP is no different to any other political party. Quite like the Conservatives, there are a lot of factions within the DUP.
Right.
You would have your evangelical Christians, you would have a progressionist wing, a modernist wing. Right? Arlene Foster would have been seen as maybe more towards the modern.
Which, again, as with Maggie, I have to pause at this point to say that on this side of the sea, the idea of her being the moderate in any party is really quite remarkable, isn't it?
Well, I mean, just for an example, the DUP fielded their very first ever openly gay candidate, and I think it was the last council elections. And we had, there was an influx of calls and stuff on the local radio at home saying that people will no longer support Arlene Foster because they
fielded a gay candidate. So it is really tied in with...
It is the evangelical Christians,
Old Testament
the
bigotries.
Old Testament, 6,000 years old. That is the DUP's main base of vote in Northern Ireland, is those old school evangelical Christians.
And how does that, as you've grown up there, so you can answer this, and it's the same in many ways as the evangelical movement in America, although I suspect most of us probably know a little bit more about the American than we do about the UK equivalent. And I know this question is loaded, and I'll deal with the consequences, but I want you to have a crack at answering it. How can you grow up in the 21st century in a world with televisions and internet and libraries and still cling to the notion that the world is only 6,000 years old, Andy?
Well, James, just to be quite honest, most of them still think it's 1690. They think the Battle of the Boyne just happened.
No, I understand the historical reference. I'm just trying to see how it answers my question. So it's a denial of modernity, which underpins so much of what the rest of us find baffling in so many areas of politics.
The issue that I have with the DUP is, James, they seem to be pick and choose. They pick and choose what verses from the Bible that they want to follow, because I have had this argument with DUP MLAs and councillors 100 times about how picky and selective they are about what they follow.
So if that's an abomination, then you must believe that is too. That used to be one of my favourite party tricks.
That's my favourite argument.
Yeah, same here. But it doesn't... I mean, this is what I meant earlier when I said you think that particular prejudice might have been put to bed by the points made by people like you and me, but I guess people like you and me only get our teeth into them very occasionally, and the rest of the time they can just sort of pat each other on the back and say, oh, yes, it's an abomination, the old homosexuality. And no one else points out that they use the same word in the Old Testament, Book of Leviticus. Andy knows this, you probably do as well if you've listened to this programme for any period of time, to describe lobsters. And in fact, as a few people have pointed out, shellfish play an important part in the conversation in the third hour of the programme, just as they did in the conversations that we had in the first 2 hours. And if you don't know that, then you do not know your Leviticus. I think one of the many, many problems with my rubbish Ronnie Corbett Tribute Act is little anecdotes from my past that I think are rather ticklish. If I tell you in advance that I'm going to share them, I build up expectations even higher than they would be if I just dropped it randomly into the conversation. And given that many of you report that my opinion on what constitutes a diverting anecdote is rather different from yours, many of my colleagues included, I worry that I've done it again now. So anyway, here's the story. Back when I used to do panel shows and TV appearance shows, which is a long time ago now, actually. It's not a little sideline that I miss, but the reason to stop doing it was actually because of the programme that I'm going to refer you to now. They used to record one in Belfast and for Sunday mornings on BBC, and I remember ringing up my dad, which shows you how long ago it was, and telling him all proud as punch, we're going to be on the telly at the weekend, and Dad couldn't have been less. He goes, what on earth are you going to Belfast for? To debate cannabis with, I think it was Peter Hitchens, to debate cannabis legislation with Peter Hitchens. What on earth are you doing that for? Nothing personal towards Peter Hitchens. It was flying to Belfast and having a largely pointless debate on telly that he was objecting to. And it was the first time I'd ever thought that, maybe being on telly isn't. But anyway, it was that show, and I was there in Belfast. And there were 3 debates on the show, and you'd usually only get to do 2 out of 3 of them. And at the time, I was very pleased with myself about the thing that Andy just referred to, about the success. I think it was before clips started going viral, but I was certainly owning a little bit of the knowing as much about the Bible as the bigots who claim that the Bible supports their bigotry market. I bought a big slice of that working on LBC. So I couldn't quite believe that the third of the 3 debates was the one they wanted me to sit out, because it was something to do with creationism and people who think that fossils are put there by God to test our faith, because, of course, if they were what they are proven to be by science, then the argument that the world of the planet is only 6,000 years old would fall apart faster than you can say Jackie Robinson. So I marched into the green room, and you may not be massively surprised to hear I was feeling rather pleased with myself after a couple of successful sort of jousts on the other debate subject. And the producer, who's a pal of mine, was sitting there looking all professional and serious, and I said, I can't believe you're not letting me have a crack at the Creationist. This is ridiculous. I can't believe you're not letting me have a crack at the Creationist. And then her eyes sort of drifted left, and I may have added a couple of lines about the absurdity of believing that dinosaur fossils are fakes put there by God to test our faith. And I looked to my left. There was someone in the green who hadn't been there before when I'd marched out into the studio. It was a young woman. And I thought, what? Oh, so I said, oh, it's not you, is it? Thinking it can't be you, because it's happening now in the studio. So why is the producer looking at you in such an embarrassed fashion? And this lovely young woman, to whom I feel nothing but embarrassment, said, no, that's my fiancé. It's just one of those little moments where you think, maybe engage brain before engaging gob next time. Work out who's in the room before you start performing to it. But still absurd, in my view, to subscribe to beliefs like this. And I don't know, I mean, I've got a better view now, thanks to Maggie and Andy, of how this happens. We'll carry on canvassing answers to that question. How significant is it for politics on the... How significant is it for the future of the island of Ireland if the DUP ends up being led, as seems most likely, by a man who seems to have got most of his politics from 1690, as Andy said? 0345 6060 973. Mark's in Belfast, appropriately enough. Mark, what can you tell us?
Hi there, James. How are you?
I'm pretty good. My confusion is genuine this morning, but also sort of slightly, I don't know, mischievous, but I'll take proper answers to proper questions if you've got them.
Well, I'll try my best.
Thank you.
Like in the case of Evan Poots, like when you have people like this, it's kind of tragic because it makes you yearn for another John Hume to come into our lives.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. And but the thing is, like as you were describing, like his various quotes earlier on, as much as that may be a shock to some people in the UK mainland, it really isn't that much of a shock to people here. Because this kind of thinking has been pretty prominent throughout the DUP.
Well, I think I knew when I was a kid, and I knew it must be 10 years ago when I would be flying into Belfast, and one of the manufactured debates would be on this field. I probably didn't understand how riven this party was with this worldview. So why is that? Why is it built upon almost exclusively Levitican hypocrisies? Because as Andy explained, you can't pick that bit of Leviticus and swear blind that it's God's truth and then completely ignore the other bit in the same book. So where does it come from? Is it back to 1690?
Partly, yeah, because as you know yourself, on an annual basis, like the Battle of the Boyne has been celebrated here on the 12th of July every single year, and it's probably much more of a bigger event here than what St Patrick's Day is over here. It's very, very rammed down your throat kind of thing.
So, do you know? I wonder how many people who get cross about the National Trust doing too much history actually know what the Battle of the Boyne was. Essentially, it was a revolution. The powers that be, the aristocracy, the barons, the dukes, decided they didn't like the bloke who was on the throne, James II, and they wanted to put someone else on the throne, so they invited a Dutch fella who was married to the daughter of King James II. So she deposed her own dad, came over with her husband, they got installed on the thrones of England, and the Battle of the Boyne was a battle between King James's forces, and so he'd have been a Catholic, wouldn't he, of course, and William III's forces. And so, but this is the bit I don't get, is you could just as likely be a Catholic with a completely literal reading of the Old Testament as you could be a Protestant.
Yeah, but I think part of the aim is at the moment for the DUP is to become the absolute antithesis of Sinn Féin at the minute.
Right.
Because as the years have went on, it could be argued that in terms of Catholic teachings, as it were, Sinn Féin has certainly softened their stance on that, because as you know yourself, gay marriage was the last place in the UK. Gay marriage was the last.
Northern Ireland was the last place in the UK to legalise gay marriage. There you go. So I just went a bit Yoda.
I know, and but obviously Sinn Féin were in full support of that. Even the Republic of Ireland had legalised gay marriage.
I don't know when you were born, but for someone born in 1972 with an apostrophe in his name, that was actually quite a remarkable moment, wasn't it? To see a country that was enthralled to the priests when I was a kid embrace the 21st century with such enthusiasm.
Well, that's it, and particularly when you look at the Republic of Ireland now, certainly back in the day, the Catholic Church had had much more of a stronghold on legislation than what it does now. The Republic of Ireland certainly keeps the Catholic Church at arm's length.
Yeah, of course.
Almost.
After the various scandals.
Whereas with the gay marriage topic, the DUP were firmly against that right up until the end.
So where's the interplay between the politics and the, quotes, religion, end quotes? That's perhaps the bit I need the most help with. It's by no means confined to this brand of Protestantism, the denigration and the demonisation of homosexuality. You can find it in almost all religions, not all, but almost all. How does it play so completely into the politics? How is one utterly inseparable from the other?
I think it's difficult to answer, but in a nutshell...
write a book if you knew the answer to that, couldn't you?
It's difficult to answer, but I would say, particularly in the DUP's case, in a nutshell, it's because the shadow of Ian Paisley still looms very large.
Yes.
Because he after all founded the party.
Yes.
And
I think he was very close to Poots' father, wasn't he? Charlie Poots was very close to Ian Paisley Sr.
Yeah, and funny that you mention that. Whenever I was in university, I shared a music class with a young girl who attended the Free Presbyterian Church, which Ian Paisley himself founded. And she's the same age as me. And I'm only 33. And she absolutely firmly believed that, as you said earlier, dinosaur bones were put here to test our faith. That's what they're teaching in church. And now, I wouldn't go as far to say that is representative of all DUP voters, because I think when it comes to the gay marriage issue, largely people within my demographic age bracket don't really care.
Well, this is why I worried a bit about Maggie's claim that 97% of the support would go along with what strikes many of us as the craziest beliefs, because you vote DUP more as a unionist than as a Christian now, I think, don't you? So it's more keeping Sinn Féin at bay, unification out of the picture. That seems to me to be more of a vote winner for the DUP than believing that the world is 6,000 years old, or that gay people are somehow awful or doing something wrong.
Particularly at the moment, yes. Considering that Brexit, which the DUP fully advocated, isn't going the way they planned, and on top of the fact that the majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to remain.
Yeah, and that's why Maggie's point about the leader being elected by the members is so important, because if it were to be elected by, not the members, by the MLA members as opposed to the party members, if it were to be elected by the party members, then it could be a very different picture. But given that it's Ian Paisley's invention, Ian Paisley's son is still in the picture, although he's unlikely to run for the leadership given the expenses scandal which saw him get suspended from the Commons 3 years ago, around the time I was talking to June Mummery, actually. So that is something I struggle to understand completely, is the parliamentary party, so to speak, takes the biblical stuff probably a lot more seriously than the average DUP voter? Or not?
Well, yes, very much so.
Okay.
Ian Paisley had a big campaign in the 70s and 80s whenever adult shops, shall we call them, became a thing in Northern Ireland, and his big campaign at that time was Ulster against sodomy. And that's and you had his usual minions behind him, Peter Robinson, and
we are back to that curious question of why they do this, and the answer is that all demagogues, whether religious or political, need an enemy. They need you to feel threatened and frightened. It doesn't matter whether the threat exists, but whether it is that word that Mark just used, or whether it's gay people that are threatening you, whether it's black people, whether it's Mexicans, migrants or Muslims, whether it's people in Brussels or people in South America, the demagogue, the man, and it's almost always a man, whose power and prestige rests entirely upon the support of frightened people, doesn't really care what you're frightened of. And that is why fire and brimstone preachers throughout history have focused upon homosexuality as a convenient repository for their own venom. And look, it works. They don't really care about all this, I don't imagine, many of them, any more than Nigel Farage cared about fishermen. I may be bound to apologise. This is a nice touch. We've got Bob in Bordeaux and Fergus in Dublin and Chris in Cardiff. Look at that. Stan in County Down, Ian in Newham. My apologies to you, chaps. And chapesses. Actually, there aren't any chapesses, because I think that my next guest will detain us until the end of the programme. I'll just leave you with one thought on our conversation about the DUP. And do you know what? I'm going to issue it without comment. But if you were, like me, reeling at some of the revelations and reports that we just poured over since 12 o'clock, here you go. Other contenders are likely to include Sir Geoff. This is for the leadership of the DUP after Arlene Foster has fallen on her sword, many believe, as a consequence of not being sufficiently in favour of so-called gay conversion therapy. And I'll say it again, you are listening to a radio station in the United Kingdom in 2021 about a politician in the United Kingdom in 2021. But this Edwin Poots character may not prove to be the only contender. Others, one is likely to be, and I quote, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, a former aide to Enoch Powell. So, all good.